Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking the Talkies. July was a very rich month for me in terms of first-time watches, so here we go. First up is a movie directed by Black Widow herself, Scarlett Johansson. It's a comedy drama called Eleanor the Great, and it stars 90-something-year-old June Squibb in the lead role, which is not something you see every day. And she is the quirky actress you've probably seen in many films like Nebraska and Thelma. In it, she's playing a character mourning the loss of her best friend who was a Holocaust survivor. At the behest of her daughter, she goes to a center for grief counseling. However, one thing leads to another, and she inadvertently ends up in a Holocaust survivors group. And in order to save face, she takes on the personality of her deceased best friend, and one little lie leads to another until it becomes an unbearable, almost Curb Your Enthusiasm level of faux pas. And things get even more complicated when she begins this friendship with a younger woman played by Erin Kellyman, who was fantastic in 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, earlier this year. And because she lost her mother and she's processing her own grief, she would be devastated if the truth about Eleanor ever came out. Even though this is a very sensitive topic, of course, I thought the film handled it with a lot of grace, a lot of humor, and a lot of heart, and by the end of it, I was tearing up, so I really recommend this one. Next up is a movie, if you had asked me in previous years, I never ever would have predicted would have made my top movies of the month list. But it is in fact Minions and Monsters, the latest in the Despicable Me franchise. And I normally very much detest those little yellow whiny creature things. But this movie was legitimately an ode to classic Hollywood cinema, which is so up my alley. It's an origin story of sorts about how the Minions came of age throughout the years and how they ultimately ended up impacting Hollywood history. There's dozens upon dozens of references to classic cinema, like Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd, Orson Welles references. It really felt like the Animaniacs or the Looney Tunes, hearkening back to those old movies and series of yesteryear. The animation was stunning, especially when they start unleashing monsters. The premise is essentially a couple of the Minions are trying to make a movie in Hollywood, and in order to make a monster movie, they summon some monsters instead of just making them out of special effects. There's this one blob creature that is just beautiful to look at how they pulled it off. And it's unfortunate that even though these movies seem to be printing money, this is the least highest earning in the whole Despicable Me franchise, unfortunately. But I think it is easily the best one of what I've seen. Next up is another movie that I had zero expectations for, but I found myself absolutely delighted at. It's a movie called Stop That Train, and it's essentially a spoof-style movie in the vein of Airplane, only it stars a lot of drag queens, and it has the special effects budget of a Sharknado movie. The film features two drag queen best friends who are sneaking their way into working on a luxury glam train, but then because of weather, it goes haywire, and they have to work alongside literally the President of the United States, as played by RuPaul, of RuPaul's Drag Race, in order to save the day. This movie was absolutely silly, but in that way that they have joke after joke after joke. Not all of them lands, but the rapid-fire joke style from movies like Naked Gun, I miss that kind of humor, and this movie does it actually really well, despite looking like it was shot on a potato with wires coming out of it. It's especially refreshing in the wake of the recent Scary Movie by the Wayans brothers that is currently sitting in my worst movie of the year spot until something dethrones it. This movie actually did that style of really silly parody humor, and it made me laugh. The next movie is a super low-budget exploitation horror movie from 1977 called The Incredible Melting Man. Now, this movie is not something that had any Oscar aspirations, but in terms of B-movie fun, I think this totally delivers. It's about this astronaut who comes back down and, due to cosmic rays, ends up becoming a melting man. A lot of body horror ensues, and the special effects were done by a very early on in his career Rick Baker, who got his fame from An American Werewolf in London, totally revolutionizing werewolf transformation effects, and Men in Black, and many, many others. You can really see the beginnings of his craft here as this guy is slowly melting down over time. His skin is just glistening wet, and it has a lot of ooey-gooey special effects that if you're like me and love that kind of practical special effects, you're going to like this movie. Next up is a neo-noir thriller from 1962 called Experiment in Terror. And this one has a lot of shades of Psycho, I would say, released just 2 years later. And it comes from an unlikely director, Blake Edwards, who's best known for films like The Pink Panther and Breakfast at Tiffany's, movies that don't exactly scream terror. But that being said, the filmmaking on display is amazing. The film is about a bank teller who is being blackmailed by this serial killer. There's like this really cool jazzy score by Henry Mancini. It's in black and white. It's very moody. And the opening shot where the main character is being choked by the killer in her own garage, it is very daring and intense for the early 60s. So I would recommend this movie if you want a hidden gem of 1960s film noir. The next movie on the list is a documentary from 2015 called The Hunting Ground, and although it came out over a decade ago at this point, sadly I don't think that much has changed in our culture. This is a very intense, hard-to-watch documentary about rapes on college campuses, and it interviews a lot of the victims and they tell their stories, and it really illuminates the major problem of how these schools operate and sweep these complaints under the rug in order to drum up more money, of course, and to feed into the cult of sports on college campuses. It was frankly very disturbing but eye-opening, and I think it's one of those things that you really should watch, especially if you have any connection to the world of academia. And of course, it's also notorious because one of the biggest losers of the Oscars, songwriter Diane Warren, lost for a song she wrote for the movie that Lady Gaga performed to many tears on the Oscar broadcast, but they lost to Sam Smith's song for the latest James Bond movie, Spectre, which I think is better as a song, but the meaning behind the Diane Warren song for this movie about, surviving traumas, things like that, it was kind of a shocking win at the time. So it does have a footnote in Oscar history, but the reason to watch this movie is because the content is harrowing, and it's important to have these young women's stories out there. The next movie is another emotional documentary from 2024. It's Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. And this pretty much just talks about his life and his upbringing and how he got into show business in the first place. And it cuts back and forth between that and all of his health struggles after his accident where the horse that he fell off of paralyzed him, and the toll it took on his family and himself, and ultimately how he helped inspire a whole heck of a lot of people. The documentary talks to a lot of his friends and family, some of whom are major celebrities like Whoopi Goldberg and Susan Sarandon and Glenn Close, and it's a really touching basically eulogy for the man, and it's really well done. Next up is a movie that I have been meaning to watch for many, many years. From 2003, it is The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise. This movie is very similar to others like Avatar or Dances with Wolves in that it's this epic movie about basically a white guy who goes into a different culture and learns their ways and learns to support them versus the more capitalistic, evil white people side. It has some problematic cultural aspects, like the fact that all the Japanese people who took Tom Cruise's character as prisoner at first, they learn to embrace him, and they basically make him into almost a semi-samurai character. If you look at all the posters, it's only Tom Cruise as the Last Samurai. Even though there's a whole ensemble of amazing Japanese actors, Tom Cruise is really the focus on all the marketing material. So while it does have some problematic aged aspects in that way, I do think in terms of an epic action-adventure romantic story that culminates in this huge battle sequence, I thought it was really great filmmaking. Next up is the latest comedy special from Louis C.K. called Ridiculous. Now, I know he is another controversial figure in our culture right now, but I do think he is one of the best stand-up comedians to ever live, and few people are able to just have that craft of performance and wordplay that he does. In this special, it might not be his best material ever, but it did make me laugh throughout, and especially when he starts talking about how we treat the elderly in old people's homes and how all the different wheelchairs are in the hallway, almost like when you turn off the bumper car ride and all the cars are askew. He just has a way of visualizing and timing that is really an expert at his craft, even if he's had some problematic aspects in the past. Next up is a particularly twisted little erotic thriller called Night Nurse, featuring characters you wouldn't necessarily expect in that genre, because you have a woman who works at a home for old folks obsessively falling in love with one of the residents. And as if that wasn't weird enough, her kink is that she and he like to make prank phone calls where they pretend to be people's grandson or granddaughter who needs help, and they are in desperate need of money, and they basically convince them to do whatever on the phone. And it is really, really weird. It reminded me a lot of David Cronenberg's Crash, in that it explores the dark reaches of people's minds who do these things that normal people would say absolutely not, these taboo-breaking behaviors, what causes people to do that, and it plumbs the depths of human depravity. The next movie recommendation I have is Evil Dead Burn. This is the latest in the long-running Evil Dead franchise, and although the story about this family that's grieving has kind of been there, done that, the real star of the show is the special effects that are absolutely horrifying. Unlike some of the movies in the series like Army of Darkness, this does not have any real humor much at all, unless it's extremely, extremely dark. It is a very upsetting movie in a lot of ways, in terms of when the demons come to play and they're possessing people and making people do horrific things. But if you are into gnarly special effects, this movie will absolutely deliver for you. As far as I'm concerned, there has not really been a bad movie in the Evil Dead franchise, and Evil Dead Burn continues to make very twisted, dark, gross out films, and it might make you wince the next time you see a candle or the dishwasher. Next up is another movie I caught up with after many years. From 2009, it's the movie Brothers. The film stars Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man himself, as a soldier in Afghanistan whose plane goes down. He's presumed dead, and his wife, played by Natalie Portman, and his titular brother, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, receive the news and they're grieving. The Jake Gyllenhaal character, he's recently paroled and trying to get his life back together, and in the absence of Tobey Maguire, he forms a sort of relationship with Natalie Portman as her caregiver, and then maybe a little bit more. But then, surprise, it turns out Tobey Maguire survived the helicopter crash, and he has been kept as a prisoner of war, and he's done a lot of messed up things in order to survive, and now he's back. And the second half of the movie is their very messy navigation of their relationship. I didn't know where this movie was going, and I missed some of the memes that have since emerged from this film, but I thought Tobey Maguire's performance in this was absolutely excellent. The examination of PTSD on soldiers and where this movie goes, I was seriously on the edge of my seat. I was reacting at the TV. I thought this was so well done and very harrowing, very intense. So this movie is actually my pick of the month. It is an excellent examination of how war will permanently change those who have to suffer through it, both the people that go to war and all the people that they know and love. Next up on the list is an archival documentary from 2024 called Beatles 64, and it's about the Beatles when they first came to America to play on the Ed Sullivan Show in their iconic performance. The film has a lot of amazing on-the-ground footage of Beatlemania. It features interviews with girls on the street who are screaming at them, and it talks about what the Beatles truly represented when they were introduced to America and the larger world outside of England. They not only revolutionized music by helping to highlight black musicians like Smokey Robinson and Little Richard, but they also helped redefine what masculinity meant with their longer hair, and they weren't like macho GI guys. They were kind of sensitive and charming and funny, silly, impish type dudes, but there were legions of women screaming after them. There wasn't really anything like the Beatles before, and this movie does a great job showing how this seismic shift happens, all while showing this priceless footage that even hardcore Beatles fans might not have seen before. The next movie on the list probably needs no introduction because it made so much money at the box office, but it is Christopher Nolan's latest The Odyssey adaptation, starring Matt Damon and just about every actor you can think of. This takes the ancient Greek myth and totally Nolanizes it. There's a lot of super serious speeches, epic music score, a sprawling cast, and even his iconic use of time displacement and his wild editing style. And I was privileged enough to see it on an IMAX 70mm screen in Rhode Island as well. This movie just screams epic, and I really appreciated especially some of the special effects in this movie, especially when they go to Circe's Island. The way Christopher Nolan visualized it, almost like a horror film, was fantastic. I really appreciated their use of sound when they go past the Island of the Sirens, although I still have my reservations about the humanity of it all and Christopher Nolan's pretty much one note about making everything as epic as possible without the peaks and valleys of a normal film. I still think that this is a top-notch director, and the film is just a technical marvel on a lot of levels. The next movie on the list is a drama from 1985 called The Official Story. It's a film from Argentina, and it's about a mother's search for the truth regarding her 5-year-old adopted daughter. It turns out that the daughter may have been born from a political prisoner taken in by the Argentinian corrupt government, and she is trying to figure out the truth. The lead actress, Norma Alejandro, does a fantastic job, and she actually won Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival that year. It was also nominated for 2 Oscars, including a win for Best Foreign Language Film. It's a very raw, poignant, humanizing story about this conflict that Americans like me might not know that much about. Next up, I have 2 movies from the same director, the Japanese master Korei Ida, who's best known for his family dramas, and I have 2 excellent family dramas to recommend. The first is from 2004 called Nobody Knows. This reminded me a lot of Sean Baker's The Florida Project in that it follows a group of 4 young siblings aged 5 through 12 who have a single mother who is often absent. While she loves her kids in a certain way, she's not a responsible mother, leaving them alone for long stretches at a time, often to chase whatever the next boyfriend is. And essentially they're left at home, very similar to Kevin McAllister, only it's a realistic version and not a silly Christmas comedy. The older son takes on a sort of parental role in the family, and that lead young actor was good enough to secure a Best Actor win at the Cannes Film Festival. It's underscored with this really beautiful guitar score. It has a lot of warmth, it has a lot of humanity to it, even though it is a ultimately pretty tragic film. And the second Korei Ida film I watched is called Still Walking from 2008. And this is essentially a day in the life of a family who have reunited over a dinner. And over the course of the day and the night, we learn bits and pieces about all the different characters and their backgrounds and their histories and their tensions with each other. We learn about their losses, their loves, their regrets, all the different aspects of humanity, and I really liked this sort of slow soaking in of information that we get about the characters, and it complicates who they are slowly over the course of the film, so by the end of it, you really feel like you get to know who these people are and what makes them tick. I was also fortunate enough to have seen Korei Ida in person introducing and doing a Q&A for his latest film, Sheep in a Box, at the Coolidge Corner Theater in Boston, albeit with a translator, but it was really cool to see a master in the flesh like that. And going ahead with the ancient Greek theme after Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, I also saw the movie Orpheus from 1960. The film is directed by Jean Cocteau, who did an amazing version of Beauty and the Beast with lots of special effects that were groundbreaking for the time. And this movie is no exception. It tells the story of Orpheus and Eurydice in modern-day Paris, where he plays this poet. One thing leads to the other, and he goes to the underworld and all of that. But it ultimately results in a love triangle between him, Eurydice, and the personification of death. And it's all very French. It strays from the original Greek myth in that he's very much torn between these two loves. He actually loves Eurydice on one level, but he also is enchanted by the personification of death, who brought Eurydice into the underworld because she fell in love with Orpheus herself. What makes this movie really stand out is its special effects. Using seemingly straightforward techniques by today's standards, the combination of them really makes this film feel beyond its years. For example, how he goes into the other limbo world to retrieve Eurydice, he goes through a mirror in a very similar style to how Neo enters the Matrix for the first time in the Matrix movie. Only in this one, apparently, they put their hand into some mercury to make it look like he's putting his hand in the mirror. Maybe not safe practices today, but it does really look cool on screen. They use reverse footage, they use double exposures, they use just about every trick in the book, including running the film backwards to make this otherworldly, interesting look that really fits in with his version of Beauty and the Beast in terms of old black and white movies that were pushing the boundaries of what could visually be accomplished on film. Next up was another movie, like Minions and Monsters, that I had zero expectations going in, but I ended up actually loving it. It is Pinocchio Unstrung. It's a part of the Twisted Universe series of films where they basically take the characters from your childhood and turn them into horror monsters. But whereas the other films in this series were terrible with bad acting, special effects that were lame, and just everything about them were not very good, Pinocchio Unstrung, I am absolutely serious, is a quality movie. I could not believe it. The film follows a very similar structure to the sci-fi horror movie Megan in that it follows a young boy whose parents die, and in order to fill that void and to build him a friend, his grandfather gives him this Pinocchio doll who looks absolutely terrifying, and the kid rightly screams at first, but he realizes, wait a second, he's a friend, and they start hanging out together. However, very similar to Megan, because when this boy ultimately gets bullied or anything is perceived as hurting him in any way, the very devout and loyal Pinocchio friend decides to go absolutely bonkers. And while Megan, because it was PG-13, and even when it was unrated on the streaming service Peacock, it never really got to that absolutely gory level of classic slasher movies, this movie does deliver on that, and it is absolutely revolting, and I loved it. Very similar to Evil Dead Burn, there are some nasty, nasty things in here, with this Pinocchio being like a little Chucky doll. He is sadistic, but he does it gleefully, and he's all doing it just to protect his best buddy. Very much in that dark, humorous spirit of the Terrifier films. I thought Pinocchio Unstrung was really, really cool. The way they visualized the doll and some of the other supernatural aspects, almost all of it was practical. An actual puppet was used. And you can get a sense that this filmmaker is actually getting better with each movie they are doing. The original Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey was just an opportunistic pile of poo, to put it lightly. It was making use of the public domain in the worst way, and I believe that was my worst movie of the year that year. But Pinocchio Unstrung is a redemption arc, and I think it is a genuinely entertaining, good time. Pinocchio Unstrung, somehow one of my top picks of the month. All right, again continuing with the ancient Greek streak, I saw Hadestown the musical in theaters. It is a pro shot of the musical that won all kinds of Tonys. And just like Jean Cocteau's Orpheus, this tells the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, although this is a lot more of a typical romantic story, no love triangles really, but it's all set within this world of a 1920s era train station. They're both super poor, and Hades entices her to go to the underworld with promises of comfort and warmth. But of course, Orpheus, the musician and poet, he decides to try to save her from Hades' clutches. The music in this is excellent, of course. It's a major Broadway production, and I liked the emotional core of the film where you have these parallel love stories between Eurydice and Orpheus and Hades and Persephone. It's almost like Hades and Persephone have to rekindle their love in order for Orpheus to rescue his love. The cast top to bottom is excellent. I recently had the privilege of seeing Andre de Shields in Cats the Jellicle Ball on Broadway itself, and people went absolutely nuts when he showed up on stage, and after watching Hadestown, I can see why. He is excellent as the narrator Hermes throughout the story. even to the point where if he just unbuttons one little thing of his jacket, he does it with such gravitas that you can't help but gasp. He's an amazing performer. I also loved the very deep-voiced Patrick Page playing Hades. He just has this silver fox energy that is very devious and just such a cool voice. He should play every animated villain character from here on out. I also thought Amber Gray as Persephone was the highlight of the show. Her pathos and her yearning and her frustrations and her comic delivery, she was really fantastic as the loveless wife of Hades, and she looks at this young couple and she maybe kind of wants that, but she hasn't had it in a long time. I just thought it was really well done. It might be a little bit overlong, but I thought that this was a fantastic musical that I would definitely not mind seeing again. My next pick for July is another Pro Shot musical. It's Merrily We Roll Along, starring Jonathan Groff from Hamilton and Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter himself. And it's a Stephen Sondheim musical that's almost like Memento, but Broadway style. It tells its story in reverse chronological order, and it follows these three friends and their journey, but backwards, where we start off almost like Citizen Kane, where we have the main Jonathan Groff character. He is surrounded by all these sycophantic people who are doting on him. He's this rich Hollywood bigwig type, but he doesn't really have any real friends left. His one older friend is drunk at this party and looking back, but he understands why she's so upset because he's turned into something that they used to resent. And then over time, we see slowly how their relationship started and how these different things led to where they are. And I thought it was really, really interesting, especially because so many musicals that come out are so fantasy-based. As much as I loved Hadestown, Merrily We Roll Along feels like a drama that's relatable. Most of the characters are in their 30s-ish era, and it made me reflect on my own life and what made me who I am today, what causes friendships to drift apart, what causes people to make certain decisions about their careers or not, and are you living the best life that you should? So I thought this story was poignant and reflective and really well done, and I'm super excited because apparently director Richard Linklater is making an adaptation of this that he filmed Boyhood style over the years, so I'm curious to see how that turns out. Next up is another movie that I'm glad I finally caught up with. It is Limelight from 1952. This is starring and directed by Charlie Chaplin, one of the great comedians of the silent era and one of the few to transition pretty well into the sound era of film. In this later career movie, he plays an aging vaudeville star who is not as famous as he used to be, and he can't pull the same crowds. And while he's in this kind of depressive funk, he happens to save the life of a woman who tries to commit suicide. And in caring for her, they develop this sort of bond, and he helps her see the value of living life. And paralleling Charlie Chaplin's real-life relationship, the two start to form a romantic relationship despite their considerable age gap. And you get to see how complicated and strained it can be to have a relationship where there's two wildly different ages and the complex, almost caregiving nature of what can result. In terms of looking at aged celebrities, it might not be as horrific as whatever happened to Baby Jane, but I thought it was a very sensitive and poignant treatment of how celebrities who used to be famous but aren't anymore, and how we treat older people was excellently handled. And the music score for the film, of course, written by Chaplin as well. He was a multi-hyphenate personality who did all kinds of different things. And weirdly, it was nominated like over 20 years later due to a loophole because it didn't play in LA until then, weirdly enough. It's also the only film in history to pair up two silent comedy legends with Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin sharing an extended vaudeville scene, which is a very cool little throwback where they're messing with a piano together. Despite coming later in his career, but maybe also because it came later in his career, the film is not only funny and charming, but it is also really poignant as well, really exploring humanity and our desires and our regrets and all the spectrum of human emotion, Limelight is a really great late career film from one of the greats. The next film is called The President's Cake, and this is from the country of Iraq. And I don't think before this I have ever seen a movie from that country because they are a very repressive country where freedom of expression is not exactly what they're known for. The film follows an orphan in the Saddam Hussein era, and as part of the government initiative, despite most of the people in the class being super poor, they have to draw lots, and for Saddam Hussein's birthday, the chosen lucky one has to make a celebratory cake to make for the class and the teacher. Now, when our orphan little girl draws that lot, you know that she's gonna be the one who has to make this cake, but she doesn't have the money, she doesn't have the materials for it. And very similar to the bicycle thieves from Italy or Children of Heaven from Iran, this journey takes her into the city trying to do whatever she can to get the money and get the materials to make this cake. And she does the whole thing with her pet chicken by her side, Moana style. The young actors in this film are fantastic, and I thought this movie really does a great job immersing you in her world. The camera often stays at eye level with the little girl, and there's a lot of humor to it. There's also a lot of intense moments, and it makes some very strong political statements without being overly preachy, because it shows you this world from the eyes of a child who doesn't really understand the larger implications. It makes it so we get all of those things ourselves without the character necessarily understanding it. It's a very powerful film that indicts this very restrictive regime, and at the same time does not sacrifice entertainment and characters. A very powerful film from this country that has not historically had a lot of freedom to tell their own stories. And my last pick for July is called One Night Only. It is a rom-com, but it has a twist on the genre of rom-com that to me would be a spoiler, even though a lot of people that I talked to knew about it going into it. I had no idea. When I first saw the trailer to this film, I thought it was going to be an annoying meet-cute between two really beautiful people and just charting their relationship, and they have all these problems that none of us have because they're so beautiful. But it turned out to be much more of a political satire than I would have thought, talking about the government and how they are controlling people's bodies and sex lives. And in this post-Roe v. Wade world, it actually had a lot to say about the modern state of relationships and how we interact with each other in this world. So even though I wasn't a fan of Will Gluck's previous rom-com, Anyone But You, with Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney, to me, this movie redeems that previous film, and it was a really charming movie that, albeit yes, there are two hot people falling in love, but it's done really well, and I was charmed, and I laughed, and it's a really good rom-com. So there you have it. Those are my picks. I know it was a lot, so thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see what August has in store.